He rode into battle with no feeling in his hands, not because he was fearless, because the disease had taken the sensation years ago. He couldn't grip a sword properly. He couldn't feel the reins. He controlled his horse with his knees. A 16-year-old boy, already half-eaten by leprosy, leading a charge against one of the greatest military commanders the medieval world had ever produced. And he won. That's the part people forget. They remember the mask, the disease, the tragedy. They forget that the man behind all of it beat Saladin on the open field and forced him to run for his life. Drawn from history. Baldwin was born in 1161 into the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Christian state carved out of the Middle East by the First Crusade, surrounded on every side by powers that wanted it destroyed. His father Amalric was king. His future seemed clear. Inherit the throne, defend the realm, continue the dynasty. Then, around age 9, his tutor William of Tyre noticed something wrong during a game. The boys were pinching each other, the way children do, testing pain thresholds, seeing who would flinch first. Everyone flinched, except Baldwin. He sat there while his friends dug their nails into his arm and felt absolutely nothing. Not bravery, not toughness. Leprosy? William understood immediately. He told the father. Doctors were consulted. They tried everything available. Nothing worked. The disease had already taken root. The diagnosis was kept quiet. Because a leper prince was one thing, a leper king was something the kingdom's enemies would use against it in ways that went far beyond warfare. If the surrounding Muslim powers knew their opponent was a dying child, the calculus of invasion changed dramatically. So the court kept its silence, watched the boy, and hoped. William wrote about it years later with obvious grief, how young Baldwin bore the pinching without crying out, with what looked like patience until the tutor finally understood it wasn't patience at all. Half the boy's right arm was already dead. He simply couldn't feel it. In 1174, Amalric died, dysentery on campaign. He was 38 years old. Baldwin was 13. The High Court of Jerusalem had a custom. Knights afflicted with leprosy were required to join the Order of St. Lazarus, removed from the main line of power, taken out of succession. The court looked at this 13-year-old boy and made a different decision. He was crowned the 6th King of Jerusalem. Maybe they had no better option. Maybe they genuinely believed in him. Probably both. Either way, a child with a progressive and incurable disease, one slowly destroying his nervous system from the inside out, was now responsible for one of the most contested pieces of land in the known world. He didn't hesitate. For 2 years, Count Raymond III of Tripoli served as regent while Baldwin grew into the role. But the moment Baldwin turned 15, he took the reins himself. He attended war councils, made decisions, issued orders, planned offensives against Damascus while simultaneously monitoring the growing power of Saladin in Egypt. This was not what anyone around him expected. Not from a sick boy. Not from someone who was supposed to be fading. Across the region, Saladin was methodically assembling something that hadn't existed in decades. A unified Muslim power capable of threatening the Crusader states from multiple directions simultaneously. He had taken Egypt. He was consolidating Syria. He had both the vision and the patience to build a coalition that could eventually encircle Jerusalem completely. And he was, by every account, deeply unimpressed by the sick teenage king sitting on Jerusalem's throne. That miscalculation would cost him. November 1177, Saladin marched into Palestine with 27,000 men. Baldwin had fewer than 500 knights. Saladin wasn't worried. He allowed his forces to spread across the countryside, looting villages, moving without urgency. The teenage leper was trapped inside Ascalon with a skeleton force. What was a dying boy going to do? He came out. Baldwin rallied what troops he could. He had the Bishop of Bethlehem carry a fragment of the true cross at the front of the column. A piece of theater, yes, but also a genuine act of faith from a man who understood that exhausted soldiers needed to believe in something larger than their own survival. Then he hit Saladin from the rear, while the Muslim army was dispersed and completely unprepared. The rout was total. Saladin fled on a racing camel and returned to Egypt with roughly 1/10 of the army he had brought. Baldwin's men captured his entire baggage train, supplies, treasure, weapons, everything. The victory was so complete it shocked both sides. Saladin, the man who would go on to retake Jerusalem, who would defeat the most powerful Crusader army ever assembled at Hattin, who would become one of the most celebrated commanders in history, had just been beaten by a 16-year-old boy who could not feel his own hands. That moment needs to land properly, because it defined everything that came after. The victory bought time, but time was the one thing Baldwin could not afford, because his body was losing the war that his army had won. Over the following years, the leprosy moved through him methodically. He lost the use of his hands, then his feet. His face changed. By his early 20s, he was going blind. He could no longer walk without support. He could no longer sit a horse. He could no longer hold a pen. He kept ruling anyway. He attended council meetings carried on a litter. He dictated correspondence. He made political decisions of genuine complexity. Alliances, troop deployments, diplomacy with Byzantium, negotiations with Saladin's envoys. While his body continued its collapse around him, his mind remained completely intact. The king was disintegrating from the outside in, and nothing could touch his ability to think, to read a situation, to understand what a decision made today meant for a kingdom that might outlive him by decades. Everyone noted it, friends and enemies alike. His mental sharpness never wavered. The disease took everything eventually. It never took that. But the kingdom was tearing itself apart from within, and this is where the tragedy deepens. Baldwin had no children. He never would. The throne would pass through his sister Sibylla, which meant whoever married Sibylla would effectively become the next king. Every powerful noble in the Crusader states understood this with perfect clarity. The maneuvering was relentless and vicious. The court splintered into factions. Men who should have been defending the kingdom's borders were instead positioning their candidates for Sibylla's hand. Baldwin arranged Sibylla's marriage to Guy of Lusignan. The right bloodline on paper, useful connections to France and England, a manner that certain powerful people found reassuring. And then he watched as Guy repeatedly proved himself unequal to actual leadership. In 1182, blind and unable to walk, Baldwin appointed Guy as regent. He had no better option. Guy was married to his sister. The succession logic was unavoidable. Then Saladin moved on the kingdom again, and Guy sat on his hands. Saladin raided across the countryside with relative impunity. The moment came when engagement was not only possible, but necessary, and Guy refused to give the order to advance. Later accounts describe Baldwin carried on his litter to the field, weeping with fury at the regent's inaction. He stripped Guy of the regency, named his nephew, Sibylla's young son from a previous marriage known as Baldwin V, as heir instead. He was trying to build a wall between Guy and the throne with whatever years he had left. He was running out of years. In his final months, Baldwin attempted to have Sibylla's marriage to Guy annulled entirely. He understood what was coming. He could see, even through failing eyes, that Guy on the throne would mean the kind of catastrophic military blunder the kingdom could not survive. He spent the last of his political capital trying to prevent that specific outcome. He failed. Baldwin IV died in the spring of 1185. He was 23 years old. His nephew Baldwin V held the throne briefly, then died too. Less than a year later, still a child, Sibylla maneuvered herself and Guy back into power exactly as Baldwin had feared. In July 1187, at the Battle of Hattin, Guy led the Crusader army into a trap that Saladin had spent years preparing. The army was cut off from water in the summer heat, surrounded and annihilated. The true cross was captured. The kingdom's military backbone shattered in a single afternoon. Later that year, Jerusalem fell. 90 years of Crusader control ended because of decisions made after one 23-year-old king finally ran out of time. The mask Baldwin wore in his later years, the iron face covering that has become his most iconic image, was not a symbol of shame. It was practical. He wore it to spare others the sight of what the disease had done to his features, and perhaps to remind everyone in the room that whatever was happening to the body beneath, the king was still present, still thinking, still deciding, still there. He had known from the day he was crowned that he was dying. He ruled for 11 years anyway, through campaigns and council chambers and succession crises and moments of genuine military brilliance, against opponents who underestimated him until he made them pay for it. Saladin never fully underestimated him again after Montgisard. He adapted, found other ways, waited for the inevitable, but he never again allowed his army to be caught scattered and unprepared by that particular king on that particular field, because he had learned, and the learning cost him 26,000 men. History remembers Baldwin IV as a tragedy, a brave boy destroyed by disease, surrounded by people smaller than him, defending a cause that fell apart the moment he was gone. That's true, but it's incomplete. He was also a teenager who held a kingdom together through the sheer force of a mind that refused to quit, who beat one of history's greatest commanders on the battlefield, who saw exactly who would destroy his kingdom, and spent his final years trying to stop that person from taking power. He was right about everything. He just ran out of time. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe and leave a like. You can also write in the comments which historical topics you'd like to see next. See you in the next video.